Sophie Hart's hands were shaking on the steering wheel and the road ahead had disappeared completely. Not fading. Not dimming. Gone. The snow came from every direction at once, thick and sideways and mean, turning the headlights into two useless yellow smears against a wall of white. The wipers had given up 10 minutes ago. They sat frozen at half-mast like two arms raised in surrender. She pressed the gas pedal harder, as if the old pickup truck cared about her urgency. It did not. The engine coughed, rattled, and then made a sound she had never heard a machine make before. Something between a groan and a whisper. The kind of sound that says goodbye. The truck rolled to a stop in the middle of a road she could no longer see. Sophie sat there for 3 seconds. Just 3. Hands still gripping the wheel. Breath coming out in clouds. The heater had died with the engine, and the cold moved in fast, crawling up her ankles and wrapping around her ribs like it had been waiting for this exact moment. She had left the Ashwood-packed territory 4 hours ago with one bag, half a tank of gas, and the kind of plan that only exists when the alternative is worse than having no plan at all. Her brother, Owen, had stood in the doorway of their father's house and told her the arrangement was final. Councilman Gerald Finch. 61 years old. 3 dead wives and a land deal that needed a warm body to sign on the dotted line. That warm body was supposed to be hers. Owen had not even looked sorry about it. That was the part that made her chest burn. Not the betrayal itself but the absence of guilt in his eyes, like selling his sister was just another Tuesday, just another line item in the PAC's operating budget. She grabbed her bag from the passenger seat and opened the door into the teeth of the storm. The wind hit her like a living thing. It pushed her sideways, found every gap in her jacket, shoved ice crystals into her ears and down her collar. She stumbled, caught herself on the hood of the truck, and squinted into the nothing ahead. Trees. She could see trees. Barely. Dark shapes against a slightly less dark sky, their branches bent low under the weight of snow that kept coming and had no interest in stopping. Sophie walked. 1 foot in front of the other. The snow was up to her shins within the first 50 steps, and by the time she lost sight of the truck behind her, it was past her knees. Each step was a negotiation. A small war between her body and the ground. She won every battle but the cost was getting higher. Her fingers had stopped feeling like fingers. They were objects attached to her hands, stiff and useless, and she shoved them into her armpits and kept walking because stopping was not a thing she could afford to do. Stopping was Gerald Finch's smile. Stopping was Owen's indifferent eyes. Stopping was the life they had designed for her without asking whether she wanted to live it. The cabin appeared between 2 pines like something conjured. Small. Stone. A chimney pushing smoke into the storm. 1 window with light behind it, warm and amber, the color of a promise. Sophie did not knock. Knocking required believing you had the right to be told no. She had used up that belief somewhere on the road behind her. She pushed the door open and fell inside. The warmth hit her like a wall. Her lungs seized with it, the shock of going from death cold to fireplace warm in the span of 1 stumble. She landed on her knees on a wooden floor. Her bag hit the ground beside her. Snow fell from her hair and melted into small puddles around her hands. She looked up. He stood by the fireplace. Still. The kind of still that large animals achieve when they are deciding whether you are food or furniture. He held a book in one hand and a tin mug in the other, and both were forgotten now, suspended in mid-use like a painting someone had walked into. He was tall. Not regular person tall. The kind of tall that makes doorframes look like an architectural mistake. Shoulders built for carrying things that other men would need machines for. Dark hair, cut short, and a jaw that looked like it had been designed by someone who understood what jaws were for. His eyes were the color of winter lakes, gray with something colder underneath. Sophie knew who he was before her brain finished assembling the picture. Every wolf in every pack on this continent knew that face. It was printed on treaties and whispered about in council halls and feared in the kind of quiet, careful way that people fear things they cannot outrun. Callum Drake. Alpha King of the Northern Sovereignty. Ruler of 11 packs spanning 3 mountain ranges and the frozen coast beyond. The man they called the Winter Throne because he held power the way winter holds the land, total and patient and impossible to negotiate with. He looked at her. She looked at him. The fire cracked between them like punctuation. "You are dripping on my floor," he said. His voice was low. Not loud. It did not need to be loud. It was the kind of voice that fills a room by occupying it rather than shouting into it. Sophie pushed herself to her feet. Her knees were wet. Her hands were still numb. Her hair was plastered to her face in frozen strands. She probably looked like something the storm had chewed up and spat out, which was accurate because that was exactly what had happened. "My truck died," she said. Her own voice sounded strange. Thin. Like someone had wrung it out. "On the mountain road?" 2 miles south. Maybe 3. He set down his book. Set down his mug. Walked to the window and looked out at the storm with the calm attention of someone reading a newspaper. "That road will not exist by morning," he said. "The drifts will bury it." "Great." He turned back to her. Those gray eyes moved over her face, her soaked jacket, her one unlaced boot. He was cataloguing her. Not the way men usually looked at her, not the up-and-down assessment she had learned to ignore by the time she was 15. This was different. He was reading her the way a tracker reads a trail, looking for the story in the details. "You are from the Southern Territories," he said. Not a question. "Ashwood. Ashwood." He repeated it like he was tasting the word. "Arthur Hart's pack. Arthur Hart is dead. It is Owen's pack now." Something shifted behind his eyes. A small adjustment. The kind of recalculation that happens when a new piece of information changes the shape of everything around it. "Owen Hart," he said. "The one who dissolved the Eastern Alliance. The one who sells things that do not belong to him." Yes. She had not meant to say that. The words came out sharp and loaded, carrying more weight than she had authorized them to carry. She clamped her mouth shut and stared at the fire because looking at the fire was safer than looking at him and seeing whatever was assembling itself behind those gray eyes. He walked past her. Close. Close enough that she caught his scent, pine and wood smoke and something underneath both of those things, something deep and territorial and ancient. It made the wolf in her flatten its ears and press its belly to the ground, and she hated that response, hated the biology of submission, hated that her body recognized authority before her mind had agreed to acknowledge it. He opened a trunk near the wall and pulled out a wool blanket, thick and dark green. "There is one cabin," he said, handing her the blanket. "There is one bed. The storm will last a minimum of 3 days based on the pressure drop this afternoon." She took the blanket. Their fingers did not touch. The space between their hands was maybe half an inch. It felt like a decision. "I will take the chair," he said. "You will take the cot in the back. The bed is available if either of us reconsiders our commitment to stubbornness." He said it without humor. Without warmth. Like he was reading the terms of a lease agreement out loud. Sophie wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and felt the shaking start. Not from cold this time. From the accumulated weight of the last 6 hours dropping onto her at once. The driving. The running. The look on Owen's face when he told her she was property. The storm. The dead truck. And now this, standing in the Alpha King's cabin wrapped in his blanket, smelling like wet dog and desperation. "Thank you," she said. The words came out smaller than she wanted them to. He nodded once. Picked up his book. Sat back down in his chair. And just like that, she was dismissed. Not rudely. Not coldly. Just efficiently, the way a man who has run 11 packs for 15 years knows how to close a conversation without slamming it. Sophie found the cot in the back corner. It was narrow and hard and covered with a single thin sheet. She pulled the green blanket over herself and lay down facing the wall. Behind her, she could hear the fire. The wind. The sound of a page turning. She closed her eyes and did not sleep. Not because of the cold, which was fading. Not because of the cot, which was uncomfortable but survivable. She did not sleep because the cabin was small and the Alpha King was 12 feet away and the storm was building outside like a fist closing around the mountain, and she had the terrible, bone-deep feeling that the running she had done today was the easy part. The hard part was going to be what happened when there was nowhere left to run. The first morning came gray and muffled, the kind of morning that exists behind a thick curtain of snow. Sophie opened her eyes and for 2 seconds she did not know where she was. The ceiling was wrong. The smell was wrong. Everything was wrong and then everything was right because she remembered, and the remembering was its own kind of punch. She sat up on the cot. The blanket fell to her waist. The cabin was warm, warmer than it had been when she fell asleep, which meant he had been feeding the fire through the night. She looked at the chair by the hearth. Empty. Book face down on the armrest. Mug on the floor beside it. The door opened and Callum Drake walked in carrying an armload of split wood. Snow clung to his shoulders and his hair and the stubble along his jaw. He stacked the wood beside the hearth with a precision that bordered on devotion, each log placed at the exact same angle, and Sophie watched him do it because there was literally nothing else to look at. He straightened up. Saw her watching. Did not acknowledge it. Coffee is on the stove, he said. She got up. Crossed the cabin. Poured coffee from a blackened tin pot into a mug that had a chip on the rim. The coffee was black and strong and tasted like it had been brewed by someone who considered flavor a secondary concern after functionality. She drank it standing by the stove. He drank his sitting in the chair. 8 feet of wooden floor between them. The fire did its work. The storm did its work. Neither of them spoke for 20 minutes. This was how the first day went. They moved around each other with the careful choreography of 2 people sharing a space built for one. When she stood by the window, he sat by the fire. When he went to the stove, she retreated to the cot. They never occupied the same zone at the same time. It was unconscious at first and then it was deliberate and then it was a system, a silent agreement written in footsteps and turned shoulders and eyes that looked everywhere except at each other. The bed sat in the middle of the cabin like an accusation. A proper bed. Pine frame. Thick mattress. 2 pillows. It was wide enough for one person to sleep comfortably and 2 people to sleep uncomfortably, and neither of them went near it. It existed in a no-man's land between his territory and hers, and they both treated it with the specific kind of avoidance that only happens when something means more than it should. By noon, the wind outside had found a new pitch. Higher. Angrier. The snow had buried the bottom half of the window, and the world beyond the glass was a blank white page with nothing written on it. How long have you had this cabin? Sophie asked. It was the first sentence either of them had spoken in 4 hours. Her voice sounded rusty. 11 years. Do you come here often? When I need to not be king. She looked at him. He was reading again. Same book, further in. He turned pages slowly, deliberately, like each one required consideration before he committed to the next. I did not know kings got to stop being kings, she said. They do not. That is why I come here. Something in that sentence cracked open a small window into a room she had not expected to find behind his face. She looked away before she could see too much through it. The afternoon brought a problem. The temperature outside dropped again, hard and fast, and the walls of the cabin began to lose their argument with the cold. Frost crawled up the inside of the window glass. The floor went from cool to frigid. Sophie pulled the green blanket tighter around her shoulders and pressed her back against the wall near the stove, trying to absorb heat through the stone. Callum fed the fire until it roared. It was not enough. The insulation in the east wall is failing, he said, pressing his palm flat against the logs. Ice has gotten into the gaps between the stones. Can you fix it? Not in this wind. The cold settled in like a guest who had no plans to leave. It crept through the floor and the walls and the gaps around the door. It turned the coffee cold in the mug and the air sharp in the lungs and the spaces between the blanket and Sophie's skin into small corridors of ice. She did not complain. Complaining required energy she was investing in not shivering. She sat on the cot with her knees pulled to her chest and the blanket wrapped around her and her teeth clenched together to stop them from chattering, and she thought about warmth the way people in deserts think about water, as a concept that exists somewhere else for someone else. He watched her from the chair. She could feel his eyes on her even when she was not looking. There was something in his attention that was different from anything she had experienced before. It was not hunger. It was not calculation. It was concern, clean and simple, the concern of someone who sees a problem and cannot tolerate leaving it unsolved. You are going to get hypothermia, he said. I am fine. You are turning gray. I tan badly. He stood up. Crossed the cabin in 3 strides. Took the quilt from the bed, the one neither of them had touched for the entire day, and dropped it over her legs without asking permission. I said I am fine. And I said you are turning gray. One of us is lying and it is not me. She looked up at him. He was standing over her, close, closer than he had been since she arrived, and from this angle she could see things she had missed before. A thin scar across his left eyebrow. Faint lines at the corners of his eyes that came from squinting into cold winds. The way his jaw held tension like a vault holds its contents, locked and deliberate. Why do you care? She asked. He did not answer immediately. He looked at her for a long moment, and in that moment she saw something move behind his eyes, a shifting of weight, a repositioning of defenses. Because you are in my cabin, he said. And what happens in my cabin is my responsibility. He went back to his chair. She pulled the quilt over the blanket and felt the layers of warmth begin to build. Her shaking slowed. Her jaw unclenched. Her fingers, buried deep in the folds of wool and cotton, began to thaw. She watched the fire. He watched his book. The storm pressed against the cabin walls like a living thing trying to find a way in. That night, the cold one. Sophie woke at 2 in the morning, and she knew it was 2 because the small clock on the shelf above the stove had hands that glowed faintly in the dark. She woke because her body had started shaking again, not the polite kind of shivering that passes with an extra blanket but the deep, involuntary kind that starts in the bones and radiates outward, the body's last attempt to generate heat before it starts shutting down systems. The fire had dimmed to embers. Orange light pulsed against the walls. The cabin was dark and freezing and the wind outside sounded like something being torn apart. She heard him move before she saw him. The creak of the chair. Footsteps on the cold floor. The sound of a log being placed on the embers, then another, then the soft roar of flames catching. He came to the cot. She felt his presence before she felt anything else, the displacement of air, the scent of him, the warmth that radiated off his body like he carried his own climate. He pulled the blankets tighter around her. Tucked them under her sides, her feet, her chin. His hands were efficient and impersonal and warm, so warm that even through the fabric she could feel the heat of them, and her body leaned toward that heat the way a plant leans toward sunlight, without deciding to, without wanting to. His hand brushed her cheek. 1 second. The backs of his fingers against her skin. Checking her temperature. A medical gesture. A practical gesture. It did not feel practical. Something passed between them in that touch. Not a spark. Not electricity. Something quieter and more dangerous. A recognition. The feeling of one locked door finding another locked door and both of them hearing the same key turn. He pulled his hand back. Stood up. Went back to the fire. Sophie lay in the dark, wrapped in his blankets, feeling the ghost of his fingers on her cheek, and she understood something she had been trying not to understand since she walked through his door. She was not afraid of Callum Drake. She was afraid of how much she was not afraid of him. Every man she had known had come with a warning label, a cost, a hidden clause in the fine print. Owen. Her father. Gerald Finch. All of them operated on the same basic principle, that her value was a thing they got to assess and assign and trade. Callum had given her his blanket. His quilt. His fire. His coffee. He had not asked her name until she offered it. Had not asked why she was running. Had not reminded her that she was in his territory, in his cabin, breathing his air, owing him something. He sat in his chair and let her exist without conditions. She did not know what to do with a man who did not come with conditions. It terrified her more than the storm. The second day was longer. Time moves differently when you're trapped. Each hour stretches and sags and refuses to pass at the speed it should, and the only clock in the room has glowing hands that seem to move backward when you watch them too closely. Sophie paced. 5 steps from the cot to the window. 5 steps back. She counted the logs in the wall. She counted the books on his shelf. She counted the knots in the floorboards and the cracks in the ceiling and the number of times the wind changed pitch in a single minute. Callum read. He had moved on to a different book, a thick one with a cracked spine that fell open to the middle like it had been read to that point many times before. He read the way he did everything else, with a focus that was almost aggressive in its completeness, as if the act of reading was a territory he had claimed and nothing was allowed to trespass on it. She tried to read. He had offered her his shelf with a gesture that was more nod than words. She picked up a book about mountain ecology. She read 3 pages. She put it down. She picked up a book about military strategy. She read 1 page. She put it down. She picked up a novel with a woman on the cover and read the first sentence, and the first sentence was so perfectly written that she felt personally attacked by it and put that one down too. "You have the attention span of a hummingbird," he said without looking up from his book. "And you have the personality of a rock. Rocks are consistent. There are worse things to be." She wanted to argue with that but could not find the flaw in it, which annoyed her. Afternoon came. He made stew from canned supplies stored under the floorboards. Venison and root vegetables and something that might have been thyme. He cooked the way he read, with total concentration and no wasted movement, and the cabin filled with a smell that was so absurdly domestic, so ridiculously comfortable, that Sophie felt something dangerous loosen in her chest. They ate sitting across from each other at the small table. Their knees almost touched underneath it. Almost. The almost was doing heavy lifting. "Tell me about the Ashwood Territory," he said. She looked at him over her mug of stew. His face gave nothing away. It was a face built for negotiation rooms and treaty tables, designed to receive information without revealing what it did with that information once received. "Why?" "Because I know the territory from maps. I want to know it from someone who lived there." She told him about the river. The one that curved through the eastern woods like a crooked spine, cold and fast in spring, sluggish and warm in summer. She told him about the ridge where the pine trees grew at angles, bent by decades of wind into shapes that looked like old women leaning on canes. She told him about the autumn runs, when the pack would race through the lower valleys and the air tasted like wet leaves and cold stone and freedom. She told him more than she meant to. The words came out in a rush, tumbling over each other, because she had not talked about home in weeks, and the act of remembering it aloud made it real again, made it hers again in a way that Owen's council meetings and Gerald Finch's land deals could not take away. Callum listened. He did not interrupt. He did not nod or make encouraging sounds. He just listened, and his listening was a thing she could feel, a weight and a warmth, like the quilt he had draped over her the night before. When she finished, he was quiet for a while. "It sounds like a place worth protecting," he said. It was. Was? She put down her mug. Owen signed the development agreement last month. The Eastern Woods go to a mining operation in the spring. The ridge will be leveled for access roads. The river gets rerouted. She said it flatly, the way you say things that hurt too much for your voice to carry the weight of, and she watched his face, and for the first time since she had met him, something cracked through the stone. It was small. A tightening around his eyes. A shift in the set of his mouth. If she had blinked, she would have missed it. But she did not blink, and she saw it, and what she saw was anger. Not the hot, explosive kind. The cold kind. The kind that does not shout because it does not need to, because it has already decided what it is going to do, and shouting would only slow it down. Owen Hart is dismantling a territory that has been held by wolves for 300 years, he said. 4 mining rights. And a marriage contract. Do not forget the marriage contract. The one with Finch. Finch gets me. Finch's mining company gets the land. Owen gets a seat on the Continental Council. Everyone wins. Everyone except you. I was not on the list of people whose winning mattered. The words came out harder than she intended. Sharper. They had edges that she had been filing down for years, and sitting in this cabin with this man and his quiet attention and his cold anger had undone all that careful filing in the space of one conversation. Callum stood up. Took her mug. Took his own. Washed them in the basin by the stove with the same methodical precision he applied to everything. "How old is Finch?" he asked, his back to her. 61. "And you?" 24. He turned off the water. Stood still for a moment with his hands braced on the edge of the basin. She could see the muscles in his forearms, the tendons standing out like cables under the skin, and she realized he was gripping the basin the way someone grips something when the alternative is gripping something else, something that would break. "That arrangement will not proceed," he said. "You do not have a say in Ashwood Pack business." He turned around. Looked at her. Those gray eyes were no longer the color of winter lakes. They were the color of winter itself, the deep mid-January kind, the kind that kills. "I have a say in everything that happens on this continent. That is what it means to be what I am." She should have bristled at that. Should have told him that his crown did not extend to her choices, her body, her future. She was an Ashwood wolf. She answered to Ashwood law, even when Ashwood law was being wielded by a brother who had forgotten what the word sister meant. She said nothing. The nothing hung between them, heavy and warm and terrifying, and she understood in that silence that something had changed. Not between them. Inside her. A door she had bolted shut years ago had cracked open, just a centimeter, just enough for the draft to get through, and the draft felt like his voice and smelled like his coffee and tasted like the word no spoken by someone who meant it on her behalf. That night, the cold came back with reinforcements. The temperature dropped so far that the water in the basin froze solid. The window glass developed a layer of frost on the inside that was thick enough to write in. The fire roared, and it was not enough, and the cabin walls groaned under the pressure of the wind like a ship in a storm at sea. Sophie lay on the cot under the blanket and the quilt and her jacket, and she shook. Her teeth clicked together in a rhythm she could not control. Her feet were numb. Her hands were numb. The space between the layers of fabric and her skin had turned into a refrigerator. She heard him stand up. "The cot is not going to work tonight," he said. "I am fine. You said that last night, and last night you were turning gray. Tonight you are past gray. I can see your breath from here." Then stop looking. He came to the cot. Stood over her. She could feel the heat of him even from that distance, the absurd, impossible warmth that radiated off him like he was powered by something other than blood and muscle. "The bed," he said. "Both of us. Shared body heat. That is the functional solution, and I am not going to watch you freeze to death in my cabin because you are too proud to share a mattress." "I am not proud. I am cautious. There is a difference. The difference will not matter much if you are dead." She stared at him. He stared at her. The wind screamed outside. The fire popped and hissed. The clock on the shelf showed 11:30 and its glowing hands seemed to pulse in the dark like a heartbeat. She got up. She took the blanket. She walked to the bed. She lay down on the far edge, as close to the wall as she could get without becoming part of it. He lay down on the other side. He did not take a blanket. His body apparently did not believe in being cold, and Sophie found this personally offensive. The bed was narrow. Not wide enough for two people to maintain separate zip codes. The mattress dipped in the middle, and gravity did what gravity does, which is pull things toward each other without asking permission. She felt the warmth first. It came off him in waves, rolling across the small space between them and wrapping around her like a second blanket. Then she felt his breathing, slow and measured, a rhythm that was so steady it almost sounded intentional, like he was breathing for both of them, setting a pace for her lungs to follow. Her shaking slowed. Her teeth unclenched. The numbness in her fingers began to recede, replaced by a tingling that was half painful and half miraculous. "Better?" he asked. "I am not going to say yes because that would mean you were right. Your shaking has stopped. That is yes enough." She closed her eyes. Listened to the storm. Listened to his breathing. Felt the warmth seep into her bones inch by inch, thawing things that had been frozen longer than one night, longer than one storm, longer than the 4 hours since she left Ashwood with half a tank of gas and no plan. "Callum." "Yes." "Why are you here? In this cabin? Alone? In the middle of winter?" He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she thought he had fallen asleep or had decided not to answer, and both of those options were acceptable because the question was more personal than she had earned the right to ask. "My brother died," he said. 6 years ago. In this cabin." The words landed in the dark room like stones dropped into still water. She felt them ripple outward. "He was sick," Callum continued. "A long time. He came here at the end because he wanted to see the mountain one more time. I brought him. I stayed with him." He stopped. The fire crackled. The wind pushed against the walls. "He died in this bed," Callum said. Sophie lay still. The warmth between them had changed. It was no longer just body heat. It was something older and sadder and more honest, the warmth of two people who have both lost things and who recognize that loss in each other the way animals recognize their own kind by scent. She did not say she was sorry. Sorry was a word that filled space without holding weight. Instead, she reached behind her and found his hand resting on the mattress between them. She placed her fingers over his. His hand was warm. Of course it was. His hand was always warm. She curled her fingers between his and held on, and he let her, and they lay like that in the dark while the storm tried to tear the cabin apart around them, and neither of them slept, and neither of them let go. Dawn came slow and reluctant, like it was not sure it wanted to be responsible for whatever it was going to illuminate. Sophie woke to the sound of wood splitting outside. She was alone in the bed. The blankets were tucked around her with a precision that suggested military training or deep tenderness, and she could not tell which, and maybe there was no difference. She sat up. The cabin was warm. The fire was high and strong. Fresh coffee steamed on the stove. The frost on the window had melted in one corner, and through the clear patch she could see Callum outside, swinging an axe into a standing dead tree with the mechanical efficiency of a man who has done this particular task 10,000 times. She watched him through the glass. The way he moved was not graceful. That was the wrong word. Graceful implies effort toward beauty. He moved like function, like the axe and his arms and the tree were parts of the same system, and the system worked because he demanded it work, and demanding was the same as doing for a man like him. She got up. Poured coffee. Drank it by the window and watched him and did not pretend she was doing anything else. He came inside 20 minutes later, arms loaded, face red from the cold. He stacked the wood. Poured his own coffee. Sat in his chair. "How is the storm?" she asked. "Worse." "How can it be worse?" Nature has a remarkable talent for finding a lower bar. She almost smiled. Caught it. Pressed it flat before it could reach her face. But he saw it anyway because he saw everything, and something happened at the corner of his mouth that might have been the beginning of something that matched what she was trying to hide. The third morning pushed them into new territory. Not geographical. Emotional. The kind of territory that has no maps because no one who enters it is thinking about navigation. It started with the scar. Sophie came back from the outhouse, face stinging from the wind, and the door was open a crack because the latch had been fighting the cold for 3 days and had finally surrendered. Through the crack she saw Callum changing his shirt by the fire. His back was to her. The scar started at his left shoulder blade. It traveled downward in a jagged line, crossing his spine, branching once near his lower ribs, and ending just above his hip. It was not a wound from battle. Battle scars are clean. This scar was deliberate. Someone had taken their time. Someone had wanted him to feel every inch of it. She pushed the door open. He heard her. Did not rush to cover himself. He pulled the clean shirt over his head with the same unhurried calm he applied to everything and turned around. She did not look away. Looking away would have been an insult. It would have been saying that what she saw was something to be hidden from, and she had spent enough of her life being the thing people hid from to know how that felt. "Your father," she said. "My brother. The other one. Not the one who died here. You have 2 brothers. Had. Marcus is gone too. But not in the way that earns grief." 6 words. My brother. The other one. And in those words, a cathedral of pain that she could see the shape of but not the interior, and she knew better than to walk inside uninvited. Marcus was older, Callum said. He sat in his chair. His voice had not changed. Same low, even register. Same careful control. But there was something underneath the words now, something tectonic, shifting slowly in the deep places where he kept the things that could break him. He believed the throne was his by birth order. Our father disagreed. Marcus disagreed with the disagreement. And the scar? Marcus's way of writing his disagreement on my body. Sophie sat on the edge of the cot. She was holding her coffee mug with both hands. Her fingers were white around it. How old were you? 17. 17. A boy. She felt something move inside her chest, something heavy and hot and furious, and she recognized it as the particular kind of anger that comes from understanding cruelty, from knowing exactly what it feels like to be young and trapped and at the mercy of someone who shares your blood but not your humanity. She did not say she was sorry. She had made that decision last night and she was keeping it. Sorry was a blanket too thin to cover anything. Owen never hit me, she said. He did not have to. He had paperwork. Callum looked at her. His eyes were the color of fog. Paperwork can leave scars too, he said. They just do not show on the skin. She nodded. Put down her mug. Pulled the blanket around her shoulders because she needed to hold something and the blanket was there and his hand was not and she was not ready to think about why her brain had made that comparison. The afternoon brought an argument. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind, the kind that matters more because each word is chosen and each silence is loaded and nobody is yelling because yelling is for people who have not learned that the real damage is done in whispers. It started when she told him about Gerald Finch. Not just the facts this time. The details. The specifics that she had been carrying in her chest like shrapnel for 3 weeks. Finch's office. The mahogany desk. The folder with her name on it, printed in block letters like a case file, which is what it was. The prenuptial agreement that was 12 pages long and included clauses about her movement, her communication, her social contacts, her right to leave the territory without written permission from her husband. 12 pages of Cage, formatted in legal font. He sat across from me, Sophie said. Her voice was steady but her hands were not. He smiled. He said I should be grateful. He said most women in my position would not receive such a generous offer. Generous, Callum repeated. The word came out of his mouth sounding like something he had found on the bottom of his boot. Owen was standing behind him. He put his hand on my shoulder. He said, Sophie, this is how we protect the family. As if the family he was protecting included me. As if I was family and not inventory. She stopped. The fire cracked. The storm howled. I left that night, she said. I packed one bag. I took the truck. I drove north because north was the direction that was not south and south was where they were. And you ended up here. And I ended up here. He leaned forward in his chair. Elbows on his knees. Hands clasped. The posture of a man assembling a response from materials that include rage and restraint and something else she could not name. The marriage contract between you and Finch, he said. Is it signed? Owen signed on behalf of the family. Did you sign? No. Then it is not valid. Under Ashwood Pact law, the family head can authorize marital contracts without the individual's consent. Owen rewrote the bylaws last year. Ashwood Pact law does not supersede continental law. Continental law has not been enforced on domestic pact matters in 60 years, and you know that. He looked at her. She looked at him. They were both right and both wrong, and the space between right and wrong was exactly the space they were sitting in, this cabin, this storm, this impossible middle ground between what the law said and what it did. Then I will change the law, he said. You cannot change a 60-year precedent because one person from one small pack showed up on your doorstep in a blizzard. I can do whatever I decide to do. That is the definition of the position I hold. And what exactly have you decided? He stood up. Walked to the window. Pressed his palm against the glass, against the frost, against the cold. I have decided that the practice of trading women as contractual assets between pack leaders is going to end. I have decided that Ashwood's internal bylaws will be reviewed by a continental tribunal within 90 days. And I have decided that Gerald Finch will receive a formal communication from the Northern Sovereignty making clear that any marriage obtained through coercion will be treated as an act of war against the Crown. He said all of this to the window. To the storm. To the mountain outside that he could not see but knew was there, the same way he knew things about continental law and pack politics and the tensile strength of wood and the exact temperature at which a woman stops shaking when you give her a blanket. You would do all of that, Sophie said. For a stranger. He turned around. You are not a stranger, he said. You have been sleeping in my bed for 2 nights. The sentence landed in the room like a grenade with a very slow fuse. She felt it hit. Felt the countdown begin. That was a survival decision, she said. Yes. It was. He held her gaze. She held his. The fire burned between them and neither of them blinked and the air in the cabin had changed composition, had become something thicker and warmer and more charged, and she could feel it on her skin like the static before a lightning strike. Callum. Yes. Stop looking at me like that. Like what? Like you have already decided something and you are waiting for me to catch up. The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. Something before a smile. Something a smile is built on top of, the foundation that holds the visible thing. I have decided nothing, he said. I am waiting. That is a different activity. Waiting for what? For you to decide what you want. Because what you want is the only thing in this cabin that matters to me, and I am not in the habit of making decisions about things that matter to other people. She stared at him. The fire crackled. The storm raged. Her heart was doing something complicated and arrhythmic, and she could feel it in her fingertips and her throat and the spaces behind her eyes. She stood up from the cot. Walked to where he was standing. Stopped 2 feet away. I want to not be afraid, she said. I want to walk into a room and not calculate the exits. I want to say no and have it mean something. I want to go home and find the river still there and the ridge still standing and the autumn runs still happening. I want to be a person, not a line item. She was breathing hard. The words had come out in a rush, pulled from somewhere deep and old and locked, and the act of saying them out loud had cost her something she could not name and would never get back. Callum stood still. His hands were at his sides. His face was stone and fog and winter lake, and underneath all of that, underneath the crown and the title and the 11 packs and the 3 mountain ranges, there was a man who had been 17 when his brother carved a disagreement into his back, and that man understood exactly what it meant to want to not be afraid. Then that is what you will have, he said. Not a promise. Not an oath. A statement of fact. The way he said the storm would last 3 days. The way he said the road would be buried. The way he said things that were going to be true because he had decided they were going to be true, and his decisions had the weight of mountains behind them. She did not kiss him. He did not touch her. They stood 2 feet apart, and the distance between them was the smallest distance she had ever felt, and the not touching was more intimate than any touch she had ever known, because it was a choice. And choices made at 2 feet are the ones that define everything that comes after. The 4th night was the longest. The storm reached its peak somewhere around midnight. The wind did not just howl. It spoke. It had a voice, low and constant and enormous, and it said things in a language that predated words, the language of pressure systems and temperature differentials and the ancient argument between warm air and cold air that has been going on since the planet decided to have an atmosphere. They were in the bed. Both of them. No argument this time. No negotiation. She had walked to the bed and he had walked to the bed, and they had lain down with the ease of 2 people who had stopped pretending that the bed was anything other than where they both wanted to be. She lay on her side facing the wall. He lay on his side facing her back. His arm was over her ribs. Not holding. Resting. A bridge spanning the gap between his warmth and her cold, and the bridge was solid and steady, and she did not want to analyze it, did not want to think about what it meant, so she thought about it constantly. Tell me something no one knows about the Alpha King, she said into the dark. He was quiet. His breath moved her hair. I am afraid of small spaces, he said. After Marcus. He locked me in a cellar for 3 days when we were children. I have not been able to close a closet door since. She felt the weight of that confession settle into the space between them. A king afraid of closets. A king who conquered 11 packs and could not close a closet door. The contrast was not ironic. It was heartbreaking. It was the most human thing she had ever heard. Tell me something no one knows about Sophie Hart, he said. She closed her eyes. I can hear colors, she said. When people talk, their voices have colors. Most people are beige. Owen is gray. Finch is that yellow that old paper turns. What color am I? She did not answer immediately. She listened to his voice in her memory, the low and steady register of it, and she saw the color the way she always did, not with her eyes but with something behind her eyes. Blue, she said. Not sky blue. Deep blue. The kind at the bottom of very cold water. His arm tightened around her. A fraction. An increment too small to measure and too large to ignore. I have been told I am cold, he said. You are not cold. You are deep. People mistake depth for coldness because they cannot reach the bottom. The cabin was silent. The storm continued, but the silence was louder, the silence between two people who are lying in the same bed and breathing the same air and holding something between them that neither of them has named and both of them are terrified of dropping. Sophie. Yes. When the storm ends. What will you do? She had been asking herself this question for 3 days. The answer kept changing shape. It started as a direction, north or south, a simple binary. Then it became a question about territory, whose land she would stand on and whose laws she would live under. Then it became something more complicated, something that involved this bed and this man and the color blue and the way his arm felt across her ribs. I do not know, she said. And it was the most honest thing she had said in years. He did not push. Did not offer solutions or opinions or the weight of his position. He lay behind her and breathed slowly and held his arm across her ribs and gave her what no one in her life had ever given her. Time. To decide for herself. She turned over. Faced him. In the dark, she could see the outline of his face, the shape of him, the suggestion of those gray eyes that she knew were open because she could feel them looking at her. I am scared, she said. Of the storm? Of what happens when it stops. What happens when it stops is that you walk out of this cabin as a free woman with the protection of the northern sovereignty behind you. The contract with Finch will be dissolved. Owen will face a tribunal. Your territory will be reviewed for conservation protections. These are things that will happen regardless of what you decide about anything else. Anything else, she repeated. Anything else. The words sat between them. 2 words. 2 small, ordinary words that were carrying the weight of everything neither of them had said out loud. She put her hand on his chest. Felt his heart beating under her palm. It was faster than it should have been. Faster than his breathing suggested. Faster than a man who controls 11 packs and never loses composure would want anyone to know about. Your heart is fast, she said. Yes. I thought you were unshakable. I was, he said. Until 4 days ago. She felt the words hit her chest. Felt them spread outward. Felt them reach the places where she kept the things she was afraid of and the things she wanted and the thin, trembling line between the two. She did not close the distance. He did not close the distance. They lay face to face with her hand on his heart and his arm across her ribs and 4 inches of dark air between them, and the 4 inches were everything, were the entire story, were the space in which 2 people who had been taught by the world to expect pain were learning, slowly and cautiously, to expect something else. The storm broke on the 5th morning like a fever. Sophie opened her eyes to silence. Real silence. Not the muffled, pressurized silence of a blizzard but the clean, empty silence that comes after, the silence of a world that has been scoured and rearranged and is now waiting to see what grows. Sunlight came through the window in a solid beam. It hit the floor and turned the wood golden and illuminated the dust motes floating in the warm air, and everything the light touched looked new, like the storm had not just passed through but had revised the entire landscape. She was alone in the bed. The blankets were tucked around her with that same impossible precision, military or tender, and the space where Callum had been was still warm. She sat up. He was at the window. Standing. Still. Looking out at something she could not see from the bed. His hands were at his sides and his shoulders were set and the sunlight was catching the side of his face in a way that made him look like something carved from the mountain itself, permanent and patient and waiting. She got up. Walked to the window. Stood beside him. The world outside was white. Completely, entirely, impossibly white. The trees were buried to their midpoints. The ground had been erased and replaced with a smooth, unbroken sheet of snow that stretched to the treeline and beyond, rolling over the terrain like a blanket pulled over a sleeping body. The sky was blue. Not the pale, tentative blue of early morning but the deep, committed blue of a sky that has made up its mind. "The road is clear," he said. The wind carved a path through the southern drifts. "You can see it from here." She looked. He was right. A narrow corridor of compacted snow wound south through the trees, barely wide enough for a vehicle, but passable. It led away from the cabin and down the mountain and toward the world she had left behind 4 days and a lifetime ago. "The truck is still 2 miles south," she said. "I will dig it out. If the battery is dead, I have cables in the storage shed." "You have a storage shed?" "Behind the cabin. Under 3 feet of snow at the moment, but I have a shovel." "Of course you do." He almost smiled. Almost. The ghost of it passed across his face and then was gone, replaced by something more serious, more weighted, more aware of what the next few minutes were going to contain. Sophie looked at the road. Then at the cabin. Then at him. "You are doing the thing again," she said. "What thing?" "The thing where you have already decided something but you are waiting for me to arrive at the same conclusion independently so it feels like my choice." "That is not what I am doing." "Then what are you doing?" He turned from the window. Faced her. The sunlight was behind him now, framing him in gold, and she thought about what she had said about his voice being blue and she realized that his voice might be blue but the rest of him, the all of him, the totality of the man standing in front of her with his stone patience and his hidden heart and his absolute, unshakable refusal to make her feel small, was gold. Was this exact color? Was the color of sunlight after a storm. "Come north," he said. "Why?" "Because the Northern Territory needs an independent voice on the council. Because the Continental Tribunal I am convening needs someone who understands what Ashwood law does to the people it is supposed to protect. Because you are smart and you are brave and you have survived things that would have broken most people, and the North needs people who do not break." "Is that all?" "No." "What else?" He looked at her. Those gray eyes. Deep water eyes. The kind of blue you can hear if you listen the right way. "Because I have spent 4 days in this cabin with you and I cannot remember what the silence sounded like before you were in it. Because your hand on my chest last night was the first time in 6 years that my heartbeat felt like it belonged to me. Because you see colors in voices and you looked at my scar without flinching and you argue with me about constitutional law at midnight and I have never met anyone who does any of those things, let alone all of them." He paused. The sunlight moved across the floor. The fire popped. "And because when the storm started I was alone, and I had been alone for a long time, and I had convinced myself that alone was a choice I had made and not a wound I was carrying. And then you fell through my door covered in snow and ice and fury and you ruined every argument I had ever made to myself about the merits of solitude." Sophie stood very still. Her heart was loud in her ears. Her eyes were burning but she was not crying because she had decided years ago that crying was a luxury she could not afford, and old decisions die hard even when new information arrives. "That is a long list," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, just enough. "I am a thorough man." "Callum." "Yes." "If I come north." "It is not because you asked me. It is because I am choosing it. For myself. Because the road south leads back to a life that was never mine and the road north leads somewhere I have not been yet and I am tired of going backward." "Understood." "And the council seat?" "I want the one on your left." Something shifted in his face. A rearrangement. A recalibration. The careful, controlled expression cracked just enough for something real to show through, something that was not king and not alpha and not the winter throne. Something that was just a man who had been alone for too long and had just been told he was not going to be alone anymore. "The seat on my left is the war advisor's position," he said. "I know." It carries authority over military strategy, territorial defense, and threat assessment for the entire northern sovereignty. I know. You would be the first woman to hold that seat in the history of the council. I know. He looked at her for a long time. The cabin was quiet. The storm was over. The world outside was white and new and waiting. Done, he said. One word. One syllable. And in that syllable, everything. The contract with Finch dissolved. The tribunal for Owen convened. The conservation review for Ashwood initiated. And something else, something that had no legal framework and no precedent and no bylaw, something that existed only in the space between two people who had spent 4 days learning each other's silence and had decided, independently and simultaneously, that they preferred the noise. Sophie picked up her bag. Callum opened the door. The cold hit them and it was different now. Not hostile. Clean. The kind of cold that wakes you up instead of shutting you down, the cold of beginnings instead of endings. She walked out first. Her boots sank into the snow, which was soft and fresh and forgiving. The sun was high and strong and it turned the snow into something luminous, a field of light stretching in every direction. He walked out behind her. Pulled the door shut. The latch caught this time, the cold having released its grip just enough for the mechanism to work. They stood side by side in front of the cabin. Their breath made clouds in the cold air. The mountains rose around them, white and silent and enormous, and the sky above was so blue it looked painted. North, she said. North, he confirmed. They walked. Side by side. Toward the storage shed and the truck cables and the road that led not south and not backward but forward, into a territory she had never seen and a life she had never imagined and a future that, for the first time in 24 years, belonged entirely to her. The cabin sat behind them, small and square and ordinary. Just a building. Just logs and stone and a chimney that no longer smoked. It kept its secrets the way all cabins do, in the grain of the wood and the creak of the floor and the mattress that still held the shape of two bodies that had lain close enough to share heat. The bed, if anyone had thought to check, was still warm. And the road north was long and white and open, and neither of them looked back, because looking back is for people who have left something behind, and they were carrying everything they needed with them, side by side, step by step, into the bright and merciless cold of a world that had just finished trying to destroy them and had failed. The mountain did not care. The mountain never cares. But sometimes, when the storm is bad enough and the cabin is small enough and the two people inside it are stubborn enough and scared enough and brave enough to stay, the mountain does something almost kind. It gives them the storm. And then it gives them the morning after. And the morning after, as anyone who has survived a blizzard will tell you, is the most beautiful thing in the world.